Hello and welcome to the Motogp Xtra podcast. Now, joining me today, as always, is my co-host Rhys. Now, today we are off to Indonesia. Now, Indonesia is a track and a place basically that's deserved MotoGP for a long time, and unfortunately, it's widely agreed that the way they've done it in Indonesia is not best for the locals. It's on an island, it's expensive, and it's not the most viewed race locally, and it's been a bit of a mess. Now, we're going to talk a lot about that today. But starting off, Rhys, what did you make overall of the Indonesian GP? Did you think it was a success or was it disappointing once again?
It was a bit disappointing once again. I'm glad to kind of say that it's not the same issues as well. It is some of the same issues, but the track breaking up
Same but
wasn't an
different.
issue. Yeah, so that was a big improvement because obviously last time we came here, the track was breaking up. Obviously, we had some pretty bad storms as well, and we've had that when World Superbikes went there previously as well. But actually, both of those series managed to get away with none of the storms this year, which is always nice. We didn't have to see the shame in trying to take the rain away this time, so big improvement on that front. But yeah, it's still kind of disappointing in some ways. Obviously, we're going to talk about it a bit more later, but still with the track surface, it's not breaking up anymore. But because the track is literally used twice a year, it's not it's not very clean. It's really dirty. It takes all weekend to try and even just put a racing line onto it. Like you say, there's issues with being able to go there. Obviously, it's on the island of Lombok, which is a very touristy island. I think it's pretty close to Bali, actually, and I think it's sort of quite expensive to get to for locals. So obviously, Indonesians on other islands and the ones that live on Lombok generally can't afford to actually pay the ticket price to come into the GP, which is a shame. So yeah, the same sort of issues, but kind of good in a way that at least the track surface wasn't breaking up.
Yeah, so we're going to jump straight into Motor 3 as we have a bombarding podcast that is going to go on for hours and hours. So we're going to start with before the race even begun in Moto 3, Ayumu Sasaki sighting lap crash. Yes, on the lap to the grid, had a crash. End up wearing Dixon's gloves. Reese, strange. I would say have we seen it, but unfortunately, sighting lap crashes in modern day racing aren't that as uncommon as we usually think.
Yeah, it's like about the third time it's happened this year. It's obviously we had Josh Watley and Dixon do it back in Austin, and then obviously Sasaki doing it this weekend. So it's at least the third time, if not even more. And it is strange to see, like you say, it doesn't really happen that often. If I think back to like the last time before, I can think really of people crashing on sighting laps. We've had the odd weird incident. I think did Mir and who else? It was Abraham. They both like locked to the front at like Le Mans in like 2019. Um, they both had like an in sync crash that was pretty weird. I think did Bastianini hit on the back of like Zarco at like Mugello in
That was
like
the end of the
20?
warm up lap, but again,
Yeah, well,
um,
same.
warm up sighting lap again. You're going around at a 60% speed.
Yeah,
I believe Ben
and there was
Spies
actually a
did it at
collision there as
Indianapolis.
well. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
so that's a bit different. And I remember Stoner did it, didn't he, at Valencia that
Yeah,
time. But yeah, we've named a few there, but that was over quite a
fiction.
long period, whereas there was three in a season here. So it's pretty strange. And the whole thing, obviously, he'd must have damaged his gloves in some way, and he either didn't have a spare pair or didn't have a pair that he'd worn in. And obviously, if you've never wore bike gloves before, they're pretty tight when you first get them. You don't have that much movement. You don't have that much feel. They kind of constrict you a little bit. And but once you've worn them a few times, rode them on the bike, you kind of break them in, a bit like your shoes, pretty much. It's very similar to that. Everyone knows that when you first get a pair of shoes, they're pretty tight. Once you start wearing them a little bit, they get a bit more loose. They start rubbing on you so much. So he either didn't have a spare pair or didn't have a pair worn in. So then Jake Dixon, who uses the same glove manufacturer, Revit, brought him a set of gloves. Obviously, they are friends, but a set of Jake Dixon's gloves to wear for the race. Pretty strange one. Not something you often see. I've seen riders wear each other's helmets in the past. When they've had the same brand for like visor reasons and things like that. But I've not really ever seen a rider wearing another rider's gloves before. I don't think.
I've seen once before a rider wore another rider's leathers. It was Michael Rutter back at it was like 2010 in PSP. They couldn't tell whose leathers he's worn, but his leathers just didn't. They either got lost in transit or just never showed up at the racetrack. And I think he was called in as a replacement rider as well, so it was a whole kind of a perfect storm. And he ended up racing in someone else's leathers, but he definitely completely um, out of the blue to say because when they're on the grid and you see Dick sinking over and back, and you're thinking, oh yeah, he's just kind of trying to tell him just put him out of his head now. Kind of again, Sasaki doesn't look like he's been on the speed all weekend. So Dixon for me was probably there to try and go right, reset. You made your mistake, focus on the race now. But it was actually to give him a pair of gloves, which is quite funny. But again, fast crash. It was through turn one, two, three, four, six, I believe. Again on a Moto 3 bike that's pretty much flat out. It looks like he just either touches the white line or the curb or a bit of both, and bang, it's gone. It was a really fast crash, so I'm not at all surprised that he went through his gloves and warmed down through the hole. But um, again, it was so strange to hear him that he was wearing another rider's gloves. Because if you look at Sasaki, he's a small character, and Dixon, being British, is a solid 5'10", 6 footer, that roughly area. So you'd imagine same hand size wouldn't be a thing they'd share. So you'd imagine straight away people are like, why didn't he just wear a new fresh set of gloves? But again, as Rhys mentioned, a brand new set of gloves are very stiff. Not only would they be hard to get feed into the bike, you'd actually probably fatigue more because you'd be just putting more force to your hands and trying to break them in. And again, in your head, you probably think a set of broken in gloves that aren't mine are probably better than brand new fresh gloves, because usually like riders will use a fresh set of gloves in the pre-season and wear them in that way to get them worn in by the time they get to round one. And like it's not something they will do throughout the season, because it's one of those things that can take a while to break in. But overall, yeah, and in the end, really, it did kind of ruin Sasaki's race. And so as we can kind of segue to it, that he's probably out of the championship after not scoring, considering the other two. What would you think?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, it's always possible. It's Moto 3 at the end of the day, and we saw the moves being pulled today. Easily could have gone wrong and ended up with Masia or Holgado on the ground, and and Sasaki picks up a good few points or something. It can soon change, but yeah, I think it probably is him out of contention because I just don't see Masia really making a mistake from here. And he is the form rider at the minute, and he just keeps picking up these good results. Obviously, it wasn't ideal today. I'm sure we'll talk about it in a little bit, but yeah, I think he probably is out of the championship hunt now. He's kind of He's never really had the outright pace on a Sunday. Well, he kind of has, but I feel like Suzuki's kind of been the fastest rider some weekends over Friday, and then maybe not even in qualifying on Saturday. He kind of shows the best race pace in practice, but then doesn't actually do it in the race. That's what it seemed like. So I think he's just been missing that a little bit. Obviously, had a couple of mistakes earlier on the season with some crashes. He did kind of recover from it, but yeah, I think another poor round here has probably done some pretty big damage to his championship hopes, especially since we are getting towards the end of the season now. There's not that many rounds left, 5 to go. And obviously with Moto 3, that is literally 5 races. So yeah, you're getting towards that period of time where people start to fall out of championship contention mathematically. And, not scoring in those rounds is not a good way to stay in the fight.
Yeah, it's funny how the Moto 3 championship has changed. If you go back 3 rounds, maybe 4 rounds, there was 4 riders and like 4 points separating them now. And again, we talked about anything can happen these flyweights. Now we're going to Phillip Island next week, and Messia has a nice lead, and the riders behind are all kind of jumbled about. So it shows that when you go to these races, you can have incidents and you can get a dirty track like we got here. You can get rain in Sepang or in Thailand, so you can get these results on these weird weekends, and things like crashing on a cycling lap can happen by not making much of a mistake. So it's the rider who will keep it clean from here out will win it. Now we will talk about Messia later in the podcast, but you'd imagine currently he is probably the man to beat, really. Now we talked briefly there on track conditions. Now it's always been known this track has been built on an island in Lombok, as we said at the start of the podcast. It was built for bikes only, which usually means cars don't usually go to tracks. Most tracks in the world are built for 4 wheels, and we go there, and they usually work okay for us. But a bike track usually doesn't go there around. Usually, a bike track doesn't really suit car racing, as the way bikes make their lap time and the way they race isn't really good for cars. Now, that is the case with the Indonesian GP, unfortunately, which means it gets used at most 2 times a year. It's on, like we said, an island, which means it's surrounded by water, and also a lot of sand comes on. So it's essentially a bit like Qatar in a way, where it's very dirty when we get there. We spend most of the weekend cleaning it, and by the end of the race in GP, it's then usually okay. So realistically, we need 2 weekends there just so we can actually have a proper race come the second weekend. Rhys, what did you make of the one-line nature of the whole weekend, and going forward, what can actually be done to kind of counterfix this before we even get to the track?
Yeah, it kind of ruins the racing a little bit because it makes it very, very difficult to pass. I think Neil Hodgson put it pretty well on the TNT Sports commentary, saying it was like a wet track pretty much. It's like a wet track with a drying line. If you go off the racing line, just forget it. You got no grip. Like if you ran wide, you couldn't even try and sort of save it, try and cut it back. You had to pick the bike up completely, otherwise you just lose the front. We go to places like Termas and Austin, where the tracks are a bit dirty and they're not used so much, and Qatar, like you mentioned before, but they're never this bad. And I remember back in the day, Indianapolis always was quite bad for it, wasn't it? That it was quite one line and you couldn't really go off it.
Yeah.
But I don't think any of them have ever really been quite as bad as Mandalika, where literally if you run a little bit wide, I mean, when someone's running off the track and you can see like dust and sand being kicked up off the back of the bike, like as if it's literally gone through, when you see wet spray come up off the bike and you're seeing that as sand, like, and that's not even going through the gravel, that's the tarmac runoff. It just shows you really that the track is in pretty poor condition. Obviously, being near the sea, you're not going to stop sand blowing on the track. Obviously, it's not something that's physically possible unless you put it inside a dome, like the Simpsons movie or something, like something crazy like that. But yeah, I don't know what they could do. I mean, the best thing they could do is get more running. Obviously, we've kind of said that World Superbikes and MotoGP. I think Asia Talent Cup also come here, to be fair. So I think there might be three a week, like three a season, but it's not many. It's not many races at all, and it's not being used. I don't know if it's used for track days or anything like that. Potentially so. I mean, with it being on a more expensive island, you would say potentially, because the people that are going to be able to afford track days and stuff probably do have a little bit more money to get there, and it's perhaps like more foreign people coming for the track days as well, like perhaps maybe people from like Australia or something coming over, and things like that, other Asian countries, or even Europe, if they just want to come and try the circuit. But yeah, it doesn't get much use. And in terms of what they could do before they get there, I don't know. I mean, they could try to clean the track. I mean, I think they were doing that, in fairness, and they were like sort of trying to do some laps in the safety car and stuff and sweeping the track and having these sweepers. But I don't think it's necessarily like sort of just on the surface. It's probably sort of ingrained into the tarmac. So I think that's obviously makes it more difficult. I feel like you have to like properly like jet wash like every inch of the circuit to clean it up. And yeah, just I don't think there's a lot you can do other than have more racing on it and just make sure that it doesn't get as dusty in the first place. I think it's hard to clean once it's already happened.
Yeah, you make a good point that again, racing will clean it up, and I think whether there is or there isn't track days, GP going there, Asia Talent Cup going there, and World Superbikes, that's not enough. Um, we see what Tarmac is like when we go there once a year, and it's just like, I mean, top level MotoGP racing in modern day, we shouldn't be rocking up the tracks that look like they've been just pulled out of the garage, that have been covered in dust, and we have to wipe them off before we can go racing. It's like, imagine turning up to Mugello and having this situation, but like Mugello gets used probably every single day. It's so busy
Yeah,
with track days and media events, and every series in the world nearly goes there at this rate. But unfortunately for Mandalika, it's one of the biggest issues is the fact that you get there. Friday is a cleaning purpose. Every rider said on Friday, track is terrible, no grip, so dirty, can't find any setup, can't do this, can't do that, and all complaining about it. Now,
even on
Rhys
Sunday though,
mentioned,
that was still the same. Like
yeah, exact. That's nearly
it
the
wasn't
issue,
really any
really. That
better. There was a line that you could go on, but even like a millimeter offline, you were down.
exactly, like usually you'll even if you turn up to the Jerez Friday morning, it's going to be green. You're going to be the first bikes out. The track will come to you by the end of Friday. Lap times get pretty serious, and then Saturday, and then you get Friday, or sorry, Saturday free practice, and then you get qualifying, and then the track is starting to come into a bit more optimal. Then you get to Sunday at Jerez, and the track's actually kind of goes greasy again because there's so much rubber down. It gets hot, it gets slick. It never has an issue like that in Mandalika. It's always green there, and if you see any helicopter shots from the weekend, it's like someone's come along with a black marker and just kind of gone around following where the bikes have been. It is so night and day, and even not even from the helicopter. If you just have like the wide angle shot coming into turn one, you could see the racing line. A lot of the fast stuff, you could see the racing line. Even the onboards, which is what the pretty much the rider's seen, you can see a racing line, which is when it's that kind of black and white and clear as day. You can only imagine what it's like to ride on, because if you try and pinch a yard in braking, or if you want to go up the inside of someone, you know for a fact that there's going to be a good chance you're not going to make that corner and you're going to take someone out. And again, we saw a lot of riders get taken out by other riders this weekend, more than usual. And I'd put it definitely down to the fact the track was green pretty much for the whole race. So unfortunately, once again, it was something we talked about in the past. Again, I agree. It's not a simple fix. It's not like they just resurface it. The only really way is to get more bikes, cars, trucks, get anything in there and just get them going around, and maybe some solution like that can come about. But we're going to move on now back to basically Moto 3. It was more of a standard race. There was 11 riders in it for the most part in the group. Again, with Moto 3 being slightly smaller bikes, you can nearly go two, maybe even three wide in some parts on the racing line on the actual clean part of the track. So Moto 3 was actually a bit more of a normal race for us. So halfway through the race, we had about 11 riders down to, I believe, Joel Kelso and Jose Rueda in P10, P11. So it was pretty much anyone's game up until the midpoint, really, Reese, wasn't it?
So yeah, it's not something we've seen so much in these flyaways. We've had some more pull away groups. So we've had some of the veteran riders, for example, pulling away, like at Motegi, we kind of had that. But coming to Mandalika, I think things are a bit closer because you don't have that massive advantage. They've only sort of been here once before. Obviously, they came here last year, so there's not loads of data. The older, more experienced riders don't know the circuit massively compared to the rookies and things like that. So I think that kind of keeps everyone closer together. Obviously, there still is that advantage for the more veteran riders because they're just better at learning circuits because they've been to more of them. But I think that overall, they're probably a bit more close in terms of pace, and with them sort of just being on one racing line because how narrow it was, only really one way to go around the circuit. So again, there is that element of that they're all taking the lines in the same way, so it's difficult for them to actually try different lines and pull away. You get that, and sometimes making these passes and making the break in the group by pulling an aggressive pass, although we did see lots of those, it's easier to make a pass when you can go offline more, but obviously when they're stuck on the same racing line, makes it a bit more difficult to break up the group. And I think as well, a lot of the circuit on Moto3 bike is pretty flat out, so a lot of slipstream opportunity to keep them scoped together. So yeah, I think that's why we kind of had that big pack, and like you say, it was anyone's race really, until we sort of got a little bit further into it, and then some of the riders did pull a little bit, but it was pretty much one massive like sort of 10 rider pack for the majority of the race.
Yeah, I feel like, again, you kind of touched on it there. Usually, in a normal situation, to overtake someone, you just go slightly off the racing line, go for a bit of a block pass. I feel like most riders were trying to overtake without going off the line, so every overtake was so close and felt maybe more aggressive than it needed to be. And I think that was just the nature of the track. I think, like, we saw David Alonso and Munoz collide like 67 times. And I think, well, two very aggressive Spanish and Colombian riders. Also, the fact that if you go off track, it's a near crash if you're going to try and overtake someone. So I think overtakes were all very close. And I think that probably played into the fact that we had a tyre race that anyone who had an advantage probably could only do it in clear air. And then when you put someone on your racing line, and when you can only use one racing line roughly, it becomes much more probably of a group race. But we did get closer to the end, and it got more and more messy. Holgado, long lap 2. How did it happen? Why did it happen?
Well, I
Bit
couldn't
of
tell
an
you
interesting
why.
one.
I couldn't tell you what he was doing, but he just decided to start cutting the track to overtake Moreira. I think sort of through the fast. Is it 5 and 6 that complex, or 6 or 7, something like that?
6, 7.
Yeah, 6 and 7. So through that complex, Moreira passed Holgado for the lead. I think he touched the green very slightly, just over the curb, but I think it probably just went down as one of his transgressions rather than gaining a track position off the track, which sometimes is treated differently by the stewards. And it seemed like the next lap, Holgado decided, well, you've just overtaken me off the track, so I'm going to do it back. But he cut a big chunk out the corner and didn't rejoin between sort of the white lines how you're supposed to. So when you have to cut the corner, you're supposed to slow down and go through a certain way to rejoin so that you lose time. And in fact, we actually did see Moreira himself do that at one point. He cut I think it must have been 6, the first part of it, rejoined and didn't get a penalty at Kemp on the bottom, no further action. Whereas Holgado took the lead with the corner cut. I don't know what possessed him to do that, because clearly he was always going to get a penalty for going that far off the track, because it was ridiculous. Like, they couldn't pretend that didn't happen. Whereas when someone touches the green, maybe they're like, they didn't really gain that much and they got re-overtaken. But if you've literally straight lined basically a section of the track, obviously you're going to get a penalty for that one. So he got his long lap penalty. It's a shame because he was actually looking really fast throughout the race, but he proved that by actually catching back up and being in contention and taking the lead back. But he'd done it again. I don't think we actually saw the second one, if I'm not mistaken, but he did the same thing again by the sounds of it. picked up another long lap penalty, and obviously he finished about fifth or sixth or something over the line, but dropped him pretty far down, and he just ruined his race. I don't know why he decided to do it. It seems very, very strange and out of character for him. I know he's made some weird mistakes this season, but that just seems next level to start just cutting the track to overtake and then wondering, not expecting a penalty for it. Just seems out of character and just a bit pointless, a bit almost like he probably made the mistake and just decided to keep it pinned to try and keep the position and not argue it later, but just doesn't really work. You can't make up a 3 second gap when you're in a big pack like that. Obviously, like we said, it's been a pretty much 11 rider fight the whole race. So if you're 3 seconds back, you go from the front of it to 2 seconds off the back of it.
Yeah, so he was actually ninth across the line. I was also surprised that he was that far back because I would have definitely, if
Well,
you
he
asked me
led
where he
about
finished,
he led about halfway through the lap, but I think
he
then
must have got very badly beaten up in the last
yeah,
corner off camera because I had very, very, very vague memory of him. Like, yeah, he's about fifth. All right, yeah, cross line. He was just around where Masia was, but just during the 3 seconds off there, he was a tenth ahead of Artola, who finished ninth. So slot him in P9. So ends up P14, 2 points, another 8 points lost to Masia. So yeah, it's a messy round for him. And in the end, he still gets beaten by Masia on track, which is a surprise because I think actually this weekend Masia was probably the weakest he's been in a while. But however, Holgado played that last lap. Like again, maybe he was fifth coming into the penultimate corner, turn 16, and maybe he went for an audacious move, thinking, "Well, I need to be as far forward here in case I do actually get myself that penalty that I deserve."
he probably
And
just
then
got
he
a
can
bit
argue
back
it.
because he was so aggressive on that last appeal. I mean, he dive bombed from about fifth to like the lead. I mean, like that the
Yeah,
pass he did where he like ran Masia properly wide, kind of. He did that then again on the last lap to some other riders. He probably just got a bit of retribution because he was probably doing that further back when he was coming back through, and we didn't notice so much. So yeah, I think like you say, he probably went for a move, or I suppose you only have to go a millimeter offline at this circuit. He could have just
yeah,
ran a little bit wide and then lost a lot of positions because to put the bike up.
yeah. Because like you're finishing P14 after like this is Messi's worst weekend in the while that he's finished anyway. He looked okay again. I think at the last lap, Messia probably got a bit beaten up, and again, I think Messia is in a point of his season now where he's thinking, I can't really afford to really go elbow to elbow with these guys in case I do come off worse. Finishing P6, taking 10 points is better than finishing in the gravel at turn 8 and Holgado being 9th or 12th on track and losing points. So I think the championship came into his head today a bit, and I think again, um, the fact that he was ended up across the line faster or first over Holgado still would have pulled points out, but very strange for Holgado to go and do 2 long laps doing identical things and both times. Like he'd served the first long lap before he actually redid it. So like surely you go right, it comes out in your dash long lap, you're like, right, I definitely caught that corner. Let's not do that again. He just went and did it again. Which was mind boggling. Now again, I don't believe he saw it because you see them on track going through 7 or 8 and it pops up in the bottom corner. He's gotten a long lap roll. Kind of like, what did he do? Did he mess up his first one? What else he did? And again, it just proved that on track, heat of the moment, title on the line, anything can happen. We've seen it in BSB, we've seen it in World Superbikes, we've seen it in Moto 3, 2, and GP. So the pressure of racing is phenomenal. And again, the fact that he didn't need to do it, like it's small cut there, isn't worth 3-4 seconds that you're going to lose for the long lap. It's worth arguably it's not worth anything when you're not really gaining that much. You have to go off track. You're going to lose somewhat a drive. Now, I can understand that if you get to run through the little chicane before it, that you can kind of maybe track extend with your momentum. But jumping off the back of a curb and then coming back over, you're going to lose at least a small bit of drive by doing that. So surely it negates it. And again, you can give him the benefit of the doubt. Fair enough. One time it happens where he just felt like he was able to just run the curb and he got it all wrong. But you can't understand how he's done it twice. Like it's a bit of a brain fade from him that he's managed to throw away another 6 points to Messia, and again, it's only made Messia's championship challenge a bit more stable. Now we've already covered everyone else pretty much in the podcast. We haven't said much about Messia. For me, didn't look like any of the Hondas were amazing this weekend, but again, Messia was towards the front, led a good chunk in between, got roughed up. I'm thinking, no, he just is starting to think, right, I can't afford to take too much risk here. But still, he's kind of doing the Garcia Guevara thing last year. I was like, I need to be at least kind of third, fourth, fifth, and I need to be beating the guys I'm beating, but I can't be beating Munoz up in a one-to-one fight. I can't be going head-to-head with that kind of guy. Is that what you kind of think as well, or do you think he's just one of those weekends where Honda was worse than it's been all year?
I don't think the Honda was too bad this weekend, actually. I mean, he qualified second again, so that was decent. Bertelli was part of that lead group, if I'm not mistaken. Again, probably give another shout out to him. He's been really good the last few rounds. First weekend, actually, that both division track bikes have been into Q2. First time it's ever happened. So the Honda actually wasn't too uncompetitive. Perhaps wasn't as good in the race. It's a bit Yamaha-like, isn't it, in terms of it has a bit more corner speed than the KTM, but doesn't quite have the punch off the corner. So I think in the race situation, gets beat up a bit more, especially when the passes are all very close, because of course they have to stay on that narrow racing line. So I think maybe they did struggle in the race, but I think the pace of the bikes were okay. And Messier was running a fine race. I think ultimately, I don't know if it was about 2 laps ago or just before, Holgado sort of sent it from like 2 postcodes back and ran really wide.
From
And like we
badly.
said, we've said this the whole time that if you go offline, you lose a lot of positions. So he lost a few positions there. And on the last lap, I think something sort of similar happened. He probably just got edged a little bit off the racing line. And I think you're probably right that he probably didn't want to risk as much. But he still finished sixth. That's still not bad considering that all the carnage that happened, because he was sixth roughly about the time that Holgado was leading, and Holgado ended up 14th and he ended up still sixth. So yeah, maybe not the strongest weekend, but still almost a top five at a tricky track where it's easy to crash. And it was some crazy, potentially over the line racing really in that last 5 laps. You had Munoz sending it ridiculously, obviously Holgado, like I said, Alonso sending it on Munoz as well. Those two were knocking lumps out of each other, and some of the other riders involved as well. It was all just crazy, and they probably know as well that Macias probably not going to risk it as much since he's leading the championship, so they probably took advantage. But to be honest, I don't think it was actually a bad weekend from him at all. I think the pace was there. I think just ultimately didn't quite play out for him, and I think yes, you can have the strategy, but a track like this, if you get pushed off the race line and you can easily crash, you can't play the strategy as well, because if someone pushes you wide, it's much more of a consequence than it's normally.
Yeah, I do agree. I think he just has his mindset right, and I think like we talk about like going off race line cost you everything in this race. He got picked up a few times, but he seemed very very acute again in the race battle. He seemed very sharp, and I think again, like if he wins the title, we won't look back and going, geez, he looked shaky that day in Mandalika. He still looked solid. He got decent points over his two main rivals. Sasaki not scoring. Holgado getting 2 points for 14th after again showing more cracks under pressure. Everything is going Messia's way, and again today would have been the race. You would go, oh, you could have easily took the front trying to overtake someone, but again was pretty much faultless. Any of the mistakes he had were other riders picking him up and him going onto the dirty part of the track, which again not really his fault. That other riders are kind of picking him up and stuff. So again, you can't really fault him. He's done pretty much exactly what he's done. He's done exactly what he's needed, more should I say. And again, today, good points. Didn't didn't get a needless long lap penalty for taking out Alonso, trying to overtake him to get back to third to chase. So after someone, he's tidy, he's clean. He doesn't strike you as a rider that's probably going to risk it all in the last lap when there's a championship on the battle, Oyagora. And it's what's going to win him his championship, really. He's ticking off all the boxes for me at the moment. And again, we talked about all season how, especially in the first half, that Holgado very level, head on his shoulders, doesn't look like he's making mistakes. No matter how his weekend is going, come the last 4 or 5 laps, he's P3, P4. It's completely switched. He's looked like he's been chasing it since, I suppose, Austria, Silverstone, that kind of part of the season where things went slightly amiss. He's now chasing it. Didn't score Mazzano, Catalunya, and Messi is just putting in a handful of points each week, and it's gotten to the point now where I believe, as I'll check the championship standings, I'm going to guess it's 25 points. It's going to be somewhere roughly around that. It is. Rhys, do you want to have it a guess before I tell you?
Is it 18 points?
It is.
Good guess.
Without maths. What did you say? 18 points?
Oh, I thought you were saying it was. Yeah, what is it?
No, no,
Actually, it's
sorry. It was 16 points. My brain, you said
ah,
18, and my brain was looking at it. So I was like, yeah, that's 18, but it
18
wasn't.
is the gap in MotoGP. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. But again, like 16 points, 5 races left. You probably want it above 20, 25 to be comfortable, but
Yeah, they can
it's
still get
still in.
whittled away, but I don't think they're going to be able to beat him that regularly.
Yeah, it's going to be up to him more than the others, I think. And
Yeah,
again,
or like
you
David
also,
Munoz on like a last lap.
exactly that was my next point, that it can be taken out of his hands, which we hope for everyone's sake, whether it be Masia, Sasaki, or Helgado, we just want a clean fight at the end. We want racing to be on the track, none of the off track shenanigans we've seen in other series of late. But we're going to move on now to Moto 2. Now, admittedly, Moto 2 is probably going to be the shortest segment we've ever done on the podcast. Here in front of me, I have 4 topics I want to talk about, and one of them is saying not an amazing race. Now, Moto 2 is always being the spec class and the middle class, it's always a bit close. It's never the amazing race. It's always like you have the high first thing in the morning of Moto 3. Moto 2 just levels you out and prepares you for the GP race at 2 o'clock. Again, all of the above comes into it. Tire pressure or tire issues, um, bad track conditions, Moto 2 being a spec class and all similar bikes. It all kind of built up to be a very drab race, and unfortunately it was. Rhys, was there anything worth mentioning for Moto 2 that we haven't on our notes that like, you can think of?
Not really. Yeah, like you say, we only got a few notes down and not really much else to say. I think we said this last week. It was kind of like one of those Honda Moto2 races where just
This is
everyone
one
was
of the
kind of
bad
spread
Honda
out.
motor races.
But yeah, this was like one of the really bad ones. This was, this was about 30 seconds up the road. This was one of the
Yeah.
really bad ones. And it almost was more like that because one of the biggest things the Triumph has allowed is allowed different kind of racing lines because obviously it's got more torque, so you can actually pick it up and squirt it out the corner a bit more. Whereas in Moto 2 before, the bikes had so little torque, you needed to have the corner speed. And obviously that Triumph allows multiple different racing lines. You can send it and try and square the guy off a little bit with the extra torque, whereas before you just lose so much drive from the lack of torque. And just the fact that you can't go off the racing line, again, just means you can't take different racing lines. Makes it even more difficult to pass. The tyres don't really wear out in Moto 2 that much because the Dunlop tyres always last. They kind of last and then drop off a cliff usually if they do go off. But um, I'm pretty sure they were mostly fine. I think I don't think there was really any tyre troubles in the race. Perhaps a couple of riders did struggle, but there wasn't like a major. Well, it wasn't like a Catalunya having to save the tyres the whole race kind of thing. So yeah, basically the gaps that formed on the opening couple of laps pretty much stayed there. It's one of those things. You're all on the same bike. If some guy's got a tenth or two on you, a lap, he'll just slowly pull out the lead until I guess in the end he's what, like 2 seconds in front by the end of the race, or 3 seconds in front, whatever, just pulling a tenth here, tenth there. And it's just difficult to make the gap back up. It's difficult to have that delta over somebody else because all the bikes are pretty much the same. And we say this quite regularly with Moto2. It is quite regularly the most boring class because it's essentially a spec series with everything being Kalex. I'd like to see potentially a revamp of the rules to maybe allow some of the manufacturers to be competitive because obviously it's not Kalex's fault, they're doing a good job, but because they're so good, you need a Kalex to win. The riders only want to ride Kalexes because otherwise they're like, well, I want to be on the same equipment as the world champion. So every team buys Kalexes, which gives them more data, makes a better bike, and the cycle just perpetuates itself. Needs to maybe concessions for the chassis manufacturers like we saw in the MotoGP class. Obviously, Honda, Yamaha winning all the time. You want to be on a Honda or Yamaha. If you enter in a satellite team, you want Honda or Yamaha because it's the only way you're going to be competitive. Brought in concessions. Look where Honda and Yamaha are now. So, yeah, I'm not saying that I want Kalex to be at the back, but what I'm trying to say is the concessions could work, could help out the other teams. And yeah, I'd like to see maybe some more chassis variation. I mean, even still, I think even if it's the same engine, same tyres, same suspension, and just the chassis is a bit different. Again, you're ultimately still virtually a spec series, but at least it would make a bit of a change. And we saw that probably the biggest mover throughout the race was Aldeguer. He bridged a gap to Canet, but then he kind of stopped the charge in the end. That was probably about the most interesting point of the race was when Aldeguer was catching Canet.
Yeah, completely agree. It was one of those races where so many laps have gone. You're like, oh, sure, there's about 6 laps left to go, and you look up and you're like 70 laps to go. Like, Jesus,
Yeah.
right, will it ever end? And like, I could watch bikes go. Like, I regularly, like 2 in the morning, would be watching like 1993 500 Grand Prix from Mass, and just be like, yeah, this is my life now. But Moto 2 does push me at times that it can be tough just because it's like over a whole lap, there's a 10th gain. You're like, yes. in 16 laps he'll be on him, and then he loses attention. Like, no, we're now 16 laps away from him getting caught from the guy behind, and it's just nothing ever happens. It's a bit like Formula One, where it's very much gaps appear. You can't get too close. It's with it being a spec series, all the same tires. I kind of agree with Reese that I'd like to see some shake up the rules just to jazz into life. Again, the fact we're getting Pirellis next year, everyone's kind of hoping that kind of changes, that'll change up the order. It'll probably change the order, but I don't imagine it's going to make racing a hell of a lot better.
I mean, everyone's still on the Calyx anyway, so
Exactly, like,
doesn't
so
make much
you're
difference.
like,
Yeah, maybe speed up will start to dominate, but
yeah,
or the
exactly.
NCS or something. Like, 'cause I suppose that's rumored to be coming back and then forward, and yeah,
Yeah,
perhaps Suter will turn back up.
yeah, maybe. Imagine if we had all them come back
Milwaukee,
up.
FTR, yeah, bring
Oh, yeah,
back some of the old
exactly.
chassis, or
Yeah.
the K. Oh, what was the previous year's Calyx? There was that for a while, wasn't there? Like the KLX or something. It was like last year's Calyx. Yeah.
Mistral chassis. There was races where kind of like the speed up now, or the Boscosaurus, should we say, where that bike goes well here because it's a stiffer frame and it doesn't take as much out of the tires, and then some weeks a struggle. But at least you had some sort of 1 week, some rider be quicker. Whereas now it's like, if we go back, this year it's been Pedro. Last year was Igor or Augusto Fernandez. The year before that it was the two Rebel K teams again. It's usually the same couple of riders each year, and that's the season done. Like, you kind of, by the time you get to Jerez, you already kind of know roughly who the main men are. Now, obviously, last year the flyaways were a bit different. We had Vietti and Canet really strong at the start, and they faded after we went kind of Le Mans and on. But
You get
it's,
that quite regularly as well. I remember
yeah,
Baldassari,
Baldassari,
who was actually in the
Nagashima.
race this weekend,
Yeah, he was,
coincidentally.
wasn't he? Which was very
Yeah,
strange. It's kind
it's
of
because
appeared.
Vietti is still out. So
Yeah, it's weird that he got him though, because he was, I don't know. I thought
yeah,
his
the
days were.
R46 Riders Academy.
I suppose, yeah, just connections ever. I suppose there's always connections between them, I suppose. But yeah, the fact that we're talking about it's weird that Valzar was in the race, and we're not talking much about the Moto 2 race. That's everything you
Yeah,
need to know. We're going to talk tomorrow about our race winner, Pedro Costa. The start won him the race, in my opinion. Got great off the line, got away early, had a little battle at the start with was it Canet
Canet.
and Gonzalez. Gonzalez kind of sat there and was hoping they'd keep battling because he was on the harder rear tire, I believe, and he was hoping probably that last third of the race had come to him. But again, really, Pedro did exactly what he needed to do when he broke kind of the second barrier to Canet. That was kind of the race done. We all kind of felt he's going to go into his Lorenzo kind of style now of just knocking laps out of the park, and that was kind of it. Really, not really was how the race was won. Really, in the end.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, he took the lead off the start. I think Canet did have one go back at him, but I think that was about it. I think Canet got back in front of him, and then he basically repassed him a couple of corners later, and then that was it. He just slowly eased away from Canet, and in the end, don't know how many seconds he was in front, 2 or 3, something like that. So, yeah, just it was another commanding race for him. I mean, I'm sure the actual final result doesn't tell the tale because he did the goon riding around the last corner and the wheelie up to the line. So, yeah, I imagine the gap probably could have been bigger than it actually says on the result sheet. But yeah, pretty much didn't see him after the first couple of laps. He just pulled away. One of those races where he just had that extra bit in hand over the field. We've seen it quite a few times this season now, where he gets to the front, runs his own pace, sets a couple of fastest laps, and that's it. He's gone. And yeah, he pulled away from the riders behind. And to be honest, everyone kind of pulled away from each other. There were pretty big gaps, a couple of little groups here and there, but generally there was about a second between like each rider at least.
Yeah, and again, perfect for his championship. Everyone he needed to beat, he beat. Obviously, winning the race kind of does that, yeah, but he didn't really have any stress from anyone around him in the championship at this point. No,
Yeah, where did
Uh,
Arbolino finish actually?
he finished, I believe,
Because he was,
sixth
yeah,
behind.
he was
Yeah,
running
sixth.
quite well at one point, but he dropped back a bit, didn't he?
He looked like he was a bit ragged in the race, and I felt like he just used a bit much tire because he got caught by Dixon at the end, and Dixon ended up jumping him and Gonzalez up to P4. So
Oh yeah,
uh,
Arbolino ran off the track, didn't he? That's what happened.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So it
because
was just
Dixon caught him, ran off the track himself, then caught him again, then Arbolino ran off the track.
yeah, carbon copy.
Yeah,
But yeah, it was again.
almost as if the track was too dirty.
I know it's almost like that exactly. best word in the world, making small mistakes being magnified out to be these huge errors running off the track.
Usually, like
Um,
you had a mistake that would maybe cost you a tenth, and you'd be
yeah,
losing like 2 seconds because you had to put the bike up completely and run off the track.
instead of having a little late apex that would just kind of cover up and kind of mask the mistake, every time someone made a mistake, they either one crashed, two took out another rider, or three ran off the track as if they had like brake failure or something ridiculous. It was a weird weekend, but again, another solid ride from Gonzalez coming into P5 again. I suppose we give him a shout out again because we do believe we mentioned a couple of podcasts ago that he's not on or not in one of the premier class teams, you could say, in the Moto 2 field. So for him to be towards the top five, top six most weeks, we are a big fan of him here. And I must say, again today could have been a podium. Went for a different tire, tried a little bit different, maybe to get himself there towards the end of the race. It looks like he does usually struggle with tires overall, so maybe going slightly harder was the way to counteract it. But I think just didn't. Again, when a track is low grip, a harder tire is nearly worse because it spins more and you get no benefit. Where when the grip is low, a softer tire provides more grip and then it would last longer. So maybe that's what cost him his podium today. But I do believe it's coming. Maybe not this year. Again, not one of the top teams in the class. So it'd be quite hard for him to mount a championship challenge in that team. But I do believe next year he will maybe get himself into a better seat. Maybe not next season, but for a season afterwards if he continues his performance. Because again, in that paddock, a couple of good results will get you a seat. You saw what kind of how Fabio ended up on a Petronas Yamaha. He ended up winning, was it one race at Catalunya? I know he won another race, but the tire pressures thing. But so it's just a matter of kind of one or two good results can swing you a good seat. But what did you make really of Gonzalez, and could we see him on a more of a Mark VDS or an IO in the future?
Yeah, it's another solid result from him. He's been pretty good the last couple of rounds. Obviously, he's not been bad overall the whole season, but definitely the last few rounds he's sort of made an extra step, and he seems to be knocking on the door that top five every single weekend. Shame for him that he keeps finishing fifth. It's like the Canet P2 thing. It's not the same. They just keep finishing in that position every time. It looked like he was going to get fourth. He was in fourth until literally exiting the last corner, and then Dixon seemed to just sort of drag into the line, which was unfortunate for him. But yeah, I think his performances definitely do show that he maybe deserves one of those better seats. Obviously, I don't think he's going to get on for next year. Just don't think there's the space. I don't think any of them are really open. But maybe for the year after, potentially there could be some movements. There could be some spots open up for him, maybe to try and move up. Because yeah, like we say, we don't know how good the team really is. It's like the remnants of the old Petronas team, which was always a bit hit and miss. Especially the Moto 2 one was always quite hit and miss with the performances. Like you'd have Dixon, pretty good one weekend. Yeah, hey, maybe okay a weekend, but then they'd both be nowhere for like the rest of the 20 in the season. So yeah, it's questionable. I mean, obviously it's been a couple of years now, so they probably do have different staff and stuff like that in there. But yeah, you don't know exactly how good the team is, but it'd be nice to see him on a better bike. And I think if he does keep performing the way he is, he definitely will get that promotion. A bit like we've seen with Salac from Grassini to Mark VDS, for example, just getting that promotion because he's been performing pretty well.
Yeah, I do think he deserves it. It's just a matter of getting the right seat when it comes available. For him, I hope he keeps performing in that team. And again, I think he had quite a bit of hype when he came into the Moto 2 class. He was kind of one of those riders to watch, but maybe that team is just taking a while. But he looks to have himself on the right path at the moment. So again, hopefully, again next year, unlikely he's going to get anything that's more competitive than he currently has. So for the 25 season, maybe he will be one of the top riders for one of the bigger seats, and then we'll really see what he can do. And you never know, could end up in a factory seat somewhere else, then in the GP class. But we're going to leave Moto 2 for there. To be honest, we spent even longer than I'd imagined we did on that class there. But we're going to move now to the Premier Class MotoGP, and we're going to start with Maverick Vinales. So close in the sprint. Rhys, being a massive Maverick fan, what went wrong? Could he have won it? What was the big thing that he lacked on not only the sprint and the main race, I suppose?
Grip, probably in both of them, to be fair. Obviously, the sprint race is probably the best start he's ever had to a race, really. He had a pretty good launch off the line, immediately attacked Marini into the second corner, took the lead, pulled a gap, and I thought that was it. Surely it's done, because we knew Marini would be a bit weak. He tends to be kind of the cork in the bottle in races a lot of the time, and does seem to hold the other riders back. So, it was always the potential there. Bit of chaos going on behind, Aleix skittling out, Binder and stuff, just again maybe slowing some of those other riders that could have come through. And obviously that's two potential rivals out there. Aleix on the same bike as him, and of course Brad Binder. You can never count him out when he's in the race. But yeah, he made that great start, pulled away, but then slowly, obviously, of course, he got reeled in by Martin and then both the VR46 guys, and seemed like he just was out of grip. It seemed like he couldn't do anything. And then we pretty much had deja vu in the main race. Obviously, this time he was running second rather than first. He had a go for the lead, but he couldn't quite pass Martin. He then obviously got promoted to the lead. Of course, we'll talk about that in a little bit. And again, looked like he may have had a secure position, but Bagnaia was starting to close. Bagnaia closed up to him sort of slowly, basically road passing like he was standing still, because again, it looked like Viñales that grip. Again, I don't want to go too much into details with the full race, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit, but caught by Fabio. Then there was really the three of them. They were dropping back from Bagnaia, obviously Viñales and Fabio, but then he seemed to have a bit of a burst of speed, caught back up to the back of him, dropped back a little bit again, then sort of caught him again. It sounded like he was saving a tyre a little bit in the main race, because he'd learnt from the sprint that he'd basically destroyed his tyre, trying to get away at the front. And just so close for him, just so close. I mean, I was willing him on to win, because I've been saying this like for 2 seasons now, that Viñales is going to win on the Aprilia, and still not happened, unfortunately. And this probably was the best chance yet. I mean, I guess Catalunya was the same. It seems to be every time he catches the guy right at the end. Like literally, he was right on the latest back wheel as he crossed the line at Catalunya. Same thing with Bagnaia, and it seems to be the tyre wear every time as well. So it seems to be something maybe he's struggling with on that Aprilia. Hopefully they can try and sort that out on the setup, because he was always pretty good on his tyres on the Yamaha and the Suzuki. So probably a bike specific thing, maybe the way he's riding the bike or whatever. It seems to be he doesn't quite have the tyres, or maybe it's just the fact that Ducati looks after the tyres quite well, and obviously Aleix just outrode him on the day at Catalunya. Maybe that's what it is. But yeah, that was his main problem, to be fair. He didn't really do a lot wrong. He actually was kind of opposite to the regular Maverick Viñales. I think probably the only thing I could criticise him for was perhaps he defended too heavily against Fabio, cost himself some time when he probably didn't need to defend quite as hard, and just not being aggressive enough when he was close to Bagnaia. He probably should have bit back a little bit more. But yeah, his pace was really good, especially considering on Friday it looked like Aleix was the quicker of the two. First time in a while we've seen him actually execute the weekend a lot better than his teammate, because Aleix had a pretty miserable couple of races after starting on the front row.
Yeah, it was a solid weekend for Mav. It was one of those ones where we've seen before, where Friday, all the talk is Maverick is quick, he looks good, the bike's working. And then we get to kind of Sunday and it's like, yeah, he did well, but what we thought on Friday didn't really come true. But this weekend was definitely closer. If we go back to his Yamaha days, he had a great knack of about 5 laps to go, being the fastest man on track by about 6/10, and he was every race. If like back when he was kind of struggling, maybe fifth, sixth, and then we get to the point where like, geez, Maverick pace in the last 4 laps was stunning. He found so much, he had so much tire, he had so much grip. So he's clearly a rider that was able to manage his tire, and even in the main race today, he said he managed it. So he said when Martin was going away from him, he was like, he knows that he can't go with him just because the tire won't last. So it felt like even though it looked like he probably didn't have the speed with Martin, I just think that he was just going, right, well, I know from yesterday that maybe I used the tire too much on the front, the rear, whatever, and then just left himself open at the end. So I think he was managing today's race a lot better on the Sunday. Just when he got passed by Pecco, maybe the head dropped a bit, because towards the end of the race, when him and Fabio are kind of coming back at Pecco, he looked like the fastest man on track. And again, it's kind of hard to criticise for over defending, because Maverick is not a late breaker, kind of squaring corners off. Even on a V4 Aprilia, he still takes probably more corner speed than most. We saw a very vivid shot.
It is also a Yamaha he was defending against, though. So
yeah,
it's not
exactly.
like he's going to be alongside the end of the straight.
Yeah. Now, again, the one thing I would say that it is a Yamaha, but also Fabio is one of the best braking people on the track. So I think even with Yamaha, I still think that Fabio would have maybe a bit, it being Fabio, it was probably that what made him a bit more tight. Again, Viñales, a couple of corners on board with Fabio, you could see that he carries a lot of corner speed, and even the Yamaha didn't really make any difference versus in the mid corner. It looked like most of the time that Fabio was gaining back was just sheer will and determination on corner entry. which is the riskiest way to do it, and it's kind of the way like Johnny Ray and Fabio have had to do it for the last kind of a couple of seasons. But again, it just came out to the last lap, and you're thinking he kind of was there, but like he might have been 10 seconds back because his chance of winning would have been the same, to be honest. Um, he has so much, but he also so little at the same time, because if we go back to Silverstone last year, was catching hand over fist over Pecco, but just when he kind of got there, he had nothing to show for it. His teammate again, when he
He
caught him
did dive into what was it?
he
Into Village.
into Village, yeah, he did make one attempt, but then a lap later he had a similar attempt and just didn't really go for it. So
Yeah.
again, if that's it, like we always kind of say, if that's a Marquez or Rossi, like something happens. Whereas with Vinales, it's always like, well, I'm happy for this result. Whereas he just needs to get that win, because I think he could unlock another level. And I think
It's
he's
Phillip
starting.
Island next.
That's it. Like, it's, if there's any place you want to go to now, it's the place where Aprilia for years worked well, even when it wasn't a good bike. I have
It's a
weird
good run
memories.
of races for Vinales now. We've got Phillip Island. I mean, don't know about Buriram, but then you've got Qatar and Sepang, both another couple of Vinales specials. So
Qatar might be. I'm going to go on a win and out on a whim and say Vinales will be strong Qatar, just because the Aprilia usually went well there. Usually
yeah.
we got lulled
Well,
into a false
Vinales is
sense
pretty
of
good at
security.
Qatar, so that's what I'm trying to say. I
Yeah,
mean, he
yeah,
has
hundred
won two
percent.
races there before.
Yeah, again, first race season is always a bit weird, but usually with Qatar,
It's
the
true. They've
Aprilia
just
always do.
tested there, so he's in testing mode still. That's why he wins.
Exactly, yeah. He doesn't know yet there's a race on. His race starts in Texas, and that's why he crashed in 17. But poor Maverick, because again, we're all kind of fans of
It's
him,
like,
and
why is this guy coasting the racing line after I do on qualifying time?
oh yeah, imagine. But again, we are big fans of Maverick, so we want him to get that win, because we both, I think, nearly most people in the paddock will agree that if he just gets that monkey off the back, he relax a bit more, and then maybe some of these little rough edges that he has at the moment with the Aprilia, he might just shave off. And when we have a weekend where the top guy crashes, or where it's a bit of weather, or where it's a bit of a iffy kind of weekend, we might see Maverick then sweep up a few more race wins, and a couple of years time then he could be kind of an outside shot of the title. Like, so it's just one small result could change a lot for Maverick. But I think we've spent enough time now on Maverick. We're going to move now to Jorge Martin in the sprint. Very aggressive. Do you agree with that, Rhys? I felt like a lot of his moves were taking a lot of risk on a dirty track. I remember watching back to the sprint thinking he's taking a lot of liberty here for not a lot of gain. Like, if you think of it, the sprint is worth points, yes, but it's not going to sway a whole championship. I know he was on the run of form, probably feeling amazing, but I just felt he was very aggressive and risking a lot.
Yeah, he was. He was risking an awful lot, but I think he knew that Bagnaia wouldn't do that,
True.
which he didn't in the sprint, and wanted to gain as many points on him as possible. Um, I think he saw this weekend as this golden opportunity to gain good points on him. And after that sprint, he took the lead of the championship. Which is unbelievable. Like, we jump back to Austria, that podcast there where we were
Yeah.
actually talking about how amazing Bagnaia had been. No one could lay a glove on him, and how reckless Martin had been at turn one. And then contrast that with what we were probably thinking to ourselves after the sprint race, how Martin had managed to overcome this ridiculous margin, which is, to be honest, arguably more impressive than what Bagnaia's overhaul was last year, because that was on a really, progressively less competitive Yamaha, whereas this is, the same machinery and just mistakes from Pecco and bad results and stuff. So, yeah, it was a great sprint race from him. He did take a lot of risk, like you said. Narrow racing line, a lot of these dive bomb passes, but he pulled them down. And to be fair, he always, he always made it stick. And you can't really fault him for that. He had a great race from sixth place, because obviously he kind of messed up the qualifying a bit. Strange little crash as he ran over the curb and ended up crashing. He's carried too much lead angle on it, but yeah, the sprint race was pretty much perfect from him. He had a pretty good start, carved his way through, was pretty aggressive, like you say, but hey, he made it stick and picked up those 12 points.
Yeah. Perfect result from, again, I just was questioning his aggressiveness, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
suppose
no, I know what
when
you mean, because he was being quite aggressive for saying he's someone in a championship situation. But I
yeah,
think when you're the chaser and you're against a factory bike, and like when you see that he's not even got through to Q2, you're like, this is the weekend to strike. Because if he did the double again this weekend, obviously that's not unfortunately how it went for him. But if he had done the double, like I think Bagnaia would be gone.
Yeah, it would be very tough for
I
Baghdad to come
mean,
back if.
after the sprint race, he was just desolate, wasn't he? The
Yeah,
whole team
he
was.
was. Yeah, they were all smiling, applauding Martin's win and stuff. But they were thinking, lads, how have we let the Pramac boys win this one? It still shows that, and I suppose we'll get to Pecco himself in a minute, but I suppose I'll leave Pecco because I want to kind of dive deep into the psyche of Pecco at the moment. But just to cover Martin, um, did exactly what he needed to do. Got the launch in the sprint from sixth, made a few positions, battled his way through. And then when he got to the front, there was kind of no question. He looked real clean and tidy. Uh, Martin of the last kind of 3 months, 2 months, I suppose, where he just gets to the front. Did this a lot in Moto 3 back in his Holland days and the
Yeah,
Delfonso
the
uh,
Christini Honda.
Crescini.
Yeah, yeah.
He got to the front and he had he was one of those riders who could just go out and do a qualifying lap on his own because he carried so much corner speed and he was a real not many Moto 3 riders you watch and go, wow, he's a real good rider on that. But Jorge Martin springs to mind. Mir was another one on the bike where you could just see there was something special going on that bike on top of it. But yeah, after the sprint, it was huge for the championship because Pecco following his team at home in P was it 9 he got, so like 2 points or
Yeah,
10th or something.
I
Very
think I
very
think I'm
good.
P8 or P7.
Oh, it probably would have been after the KTM Aprilia crash, yeah.
Yeah,
So again, not major points, but again, um,
he
Martin
stayed
winning
on, which
made
was
it.
important. But
Exactly. I think he probably used the sprint race to reset because, as we get to his main race, was a lot better. But going forward, we're going to go to Pecco being lost. We've already kind of covered that. I have a conspiracy theory, which is not something I say many times on a podcast. Now, I'm going to pull up my phone here. I'm going to start reading out some facts that I've been digging up on Twitter. So basically,
facts and Twitter
rough.
is a
Oh yes,
is,
yes,
is a
yes, yes. Let me
dangerous
get my
game.
tinfoil
That.
hat on. So MotoGP he published attendance figures for this weekend was 102,929 people. That's 102,000 through the gate Friday morning to Sunday evening leaving. So 8,500 on Friday, 21,000 on Saturday, and 73,000 on Sunday. Now, from a reporter who I will not name because it might lose me credibility, roughly he counted 1,000 people. Well, he didn't count personally, but he said on the start pit straight does a grandstand opposite the start finish straight. 13,000 people is the limit for that. He counted roughly 150 to 300, he said, judging by how scattered it was on Friday morning. He reckons if there was 1,000 people at the track on Friday, that was a lot. So that already, that is 7 times that is what they've calculated come through the gate. So he reckons nowhere near throughout the weekend. He spoke to a local business owner that morning who told him that it has been the quietest week for business since COVID. Tours staying away and race fans aren't coming. So again, we touched at the start of the podcast that um, Lombok, middle of kind of nowhere in terms of for the locals, expensive, hard to get to, kind of bad decision to build a racetrack there when it's kind of meant to be um, at the heart of Indonesia, really. So
It's
the
a tourist island
conspiracy,
at the end of the day, isn't it? It's like
exactly,
people.
yeah,
It's like
it's
people go
yeah,
to Bali for a lovely holiday, because it's nice weather and the island's nice. Lombok is the same. It's like next to Bali. It's like the same climate, same.
yeah,
People just go there on holiday. They don't go there. Like people obviously live there, but it's not a hub of like Indonesians. It's like people from abroad going on holiday because the beach is nice.
yeah. So the conspiracy for me is that you might have heard through the race, especially present in MotoGP Sprint and the feature race, that you could audibly hear the crowds cheering and ooh and ah and all the theatre. I believe that was dubbed on. I don't believe that to be real. From watching, because I was hearing it so much, I was like, you never hear that. You just don't ever hear the crowd over the bikes. Other than the shots when the camera's like at the top of a grandstand, you can hear them like underneath them. But like when you're watching the wide camera lenses from the track, you I can never account hearing the fans. Um, and it was so it sounded like that the place was like a coliseum of 100 200,000 people at every corner. And for me now, again, this is very much a conspiracy theory. I have no actual proof of this, which is the best conspiracies. um basically I believe that that audio of the cheering and the ooh when anything happened, because every time it happened, it was felt like the same thing was played over again. If that's what kind of gave it away, is like you kept hearing the same, and like your brain is great at picking out patterns. And I think I could just pick out that every time there was an overtake or someone wide, it was the same ooh played, or kind of it was the same thing played every time. And again, now maybe if you go back and watch it, if you have a kind of a access to the recording of it, to me it sounds clear as day when I listen to it back, because I actually watched back to the GP race to the last like maybe half race distance, and when there was some overtakes going on, you could hear ooh when there was kind of not really no reason to be going ooh, if that makes sense. So I believe that it's dubbed on to make it feel like there's more people there. I'm going to throw it to you, Reese, now, where you can maybe save our podcast's hopes here, and tell me what you think of my beautiful conspiracy.
I mean, I hadn't really thought about it until you said, because we were going through the notes beforehand, and I was like, "What is this conspiracy theory?" Because he wrote like conspiracy theory fans, and I thought it was going to be something like people have been said on Twitter about like Ducati like sabotaging Martin, or something like ridiculous. Like I thought it was going to be like about that, but then he told me about it, that it was the fans like audio, and I can kind of see what you mean, like by it, because you could hear the fans very loud, and I always think that whenever you hear the fans that loud, it just takes me back to Chang 2019. Always sticks out for me. You can hear the fans like screaming as like Fabio and Mark were doing battle, and it made me think. I wonder if the same thing happened there. Maybe I'm maybe not gonna go as far as say that it's fake, but maybe they've like turned it up. I mean, I know that like TV shows have done this before. And I don't mean like a laugh track on a TV show, like actual like, live TV shows. I don't think like WWE may have done it before, like where I think there was like loads of boos in the crowd and they like edited it to sound like cheers. So it is something that's done on TV sometimes. So maybe it's something they've done, but it just seems weird because you don't hear them usually at any other round. Maybe it's something new they're trying, where they're trying to mix in the fan audio into it. But yeah, it did kind of sound like the same audio over and over again, didn't it? So yeah, I'm going to sit on the fence firmly, but I can see what you mean, and I'd love to hear what you guys think as well, because I hadn't considered it till you said, and then you think back to what you heard, and you're like, you could be on something there.
Yeah, again, it's firmly a conspiracy. I've seen nothing about it other than the fact that attendance was again ridiculously low, considering Indonesia's support for like Mark Marquez's biggest fan group is probably outside of
Yeah,
Spain is Indonesia, so it is a huge country for the sport of MotoGP.
and the
So
Indonesian one is probably bigger than the Spanish one.
probably,
The
yeah, probably
contingent, I
you're
would
probably
say.
right,
Yeah,
yeah. So again, the fact that there was apparently 7,000, again, I don't believe. I'd like 100,000 during the whole weekend. I don't believe that. That's the sort of numbers you get in Assen,
I find it
which is
hard to
like
believe that there was 21,000 on Saturday and 75 on like Sunday. There's not going to be three
yeah,
times as many people on
yeah.
Sunday as Saturday. I know more people are going to go on Sunday, of course, but there's not going to be three times the
No,
amount. Surely
no,
not.
no, no.
No.
I agree as well. And like I saw, because I noticed it when I watched it back the second time, I wasn't even looking at the bikes. I was trying to see the outside shots, and anytime they go to helicopter, it didn't look that busy. It looked a Saturday morning, to put it mildly, where it looked slightly busier. It didn't look like a Friday where empty seats, kind
Or
of
like
families
warm
of
up on a
four.
Sunday, like Moto 3 warm up,
Exactly,
like back in
exactly,
the day, like
exactly.
they'd show
Yeah,
the
yeah,
crowd and you'd see people coming in and there was like a few
yeah.
people in the stands and
You see the dedicated people that have kind of slept in either in the camper vans or the tents in Le Mans or something like that. But by no means did it look like there was 73,000 fans. And no, I do want to point out I was doing this during the GP race, which is by all intents and purposes the premier event of the whole weekend. That's what you pay your big bucks to go see. Like so,
yeah, you're not
um,
going home after the Moto 2 race, are you? Like,
so yeah.
well,
Again,
you
I
might
again
after that Moto 2 race, to be fair.
exactly.
But
It'd be interesting to get some feedback in the comments down below. Let me know if I'm have I gone mad or anyone else. I'd be very surprised if anyone else knows, because it was one of those things where it was like it just sounded so weird, because it did. It kind of gave me, like, again, you mentioned the laugh track and like Friends and like Big Bang Theory and all that, like, and it was kind of like that, where it's like it felt like ba boom. It was like every time it was like rider goes side by side, and then it just like audio track plays, and you're like, what is this? Like, it just didn't sound real to me. But again, maybe the Asian fans are more excited by overtaking than maybe the Europeans or the Americas and stuff like that. But I don't know. For me, I just found it weird. But we're gonna move on now, because we've wasted enough time on conspiracy theories on this channel. Yamaha, good weekend, kind of. Um, I've done as good weekend. As my notes were going through, I was writing that Yamaha good again, but went backwards amazingly fast. But then crashed his mother's, and he had I say he, well, Frankie Morbidelli was four
Morbidelli
laps
was
down.
2 laps down. Yeah, like 4 laps down.
He came into the pits after 3 laps.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I didn't hear anything about it. Haven't heard anything since. It's been about 14, 13 hours at the time of recording since the race, and I've heard nothing about it. So they obviously sent him back out. Must have had some sort of technical issue. They probably saw there was still points on the table, so went out. He scored 2 points for P14, last of the finishers. And yeah, it was again for Fabio, another podium. Could have been P2. He seemed very frustrated afterwards, but again, like if you saw that around the time where Aleix overtook him and Peck overtook him, it was night and day the lack of speed that bike has when it's around other bikes. It's crazy to watch.
Yeah, they like literally blasted him like he stood still. Like Bagnaia was charging through on that opening lap, and obviously, he's on the better bike and was obviously charging. I think Aleix, most of his pass was probably just down to the fact he was on soft, so he just had more grip as well. So obviously at that point in the race, because it was like lap one, lap two, so he pulled the pass on Fabio. But then Fabio in the second half of the race was unbelievable. He caught up. He was about 3 seconds off the back of like Bagnaia. He caught him and Viñales up, and if it's a time trial at that point in the race, he easily wins that one. And he was so mad in Parc Ferme because I suppose he's not been anywhere near a win all season. I know he had a podium at India, didn't he? Inherited from a Bagnaia crash, and he had a podium at Austin, inherited from a Bagnaia crash, and obviously he had the podium today, inherited from a Martin crash. So it seems to be that someone in front does need to crash for him to actually get the podium. But yeah, he was actually he could see the leader, like he was within a second of the race leader, and that wasn't the case at the previous two podiums. So yeah, I think he was kind of mad, and he targeted a podium coming into this weekend. So I'd imagine once he realised, what was happening, he would have definitely decided, he would have changed his focus to the win pretty quickly once he realised he was gaining on them. But it was clear as day he couldn't overtake him. He just couldn't overtake him. Honestly, I think he actually would have had an easier time passing Bagnaia than Viñales, which is a strange thing to say because usually you'd think, the Ducati's quicker on the straight, be even harder to pass, and Bagnaia so good on the brakes. But I think Viñales as a Aprilia was so good in the corners as well, they didn't allow him to get the run onto the straight to even try it. Whereas perhaps the Ducati was a bit weaker in the S's. Perhaps he'd actually get the run on the Ducati more. And also Bagnaia being a championship contender would perhaps maybe allow the Yamaha to come flying up the inside rather than risk tipping in, whereas Viñales obviously didn't have a lot to lose. So yeah, it kind of just showed clear as day what the problem is with the bike. He just doesn't have enough power, not even necessarily the power, just the punch off the corner is not good enough. It's probably an electronic or chassis problem more than a power problem. I know obviously the power is part of it, but they made a more powerful engine this year. It's clearly not really helped him. They've been worse, if anything. So yeah, it just showed he couldn't make a pass. Even when Viñales made a small error, he wasn't able to get past. And I think if it's any other track without the narrow racing line, he has a better shot because he can actually send it. But he couldn't even risk a send because he just crashed. So yeah, pretty frustrating for him. But it seems like he's made a mental switch. And I think we were saying it going into the flyaways that these tracks we got less data, i.e. a track they've only been to once, the tarmac was ripping up last time and the last race was wet, when they've not got the data and the Ducati and the all these the newer factories that have taken over, they've got better data, guys, right? That's a big part of why they are the way they are. They can look at the data, they can make the setup improvements, they make a step over the weekend, and when they come there next year they make a step again and they get quicker and quicker and quicker. You get to track there's no data. The Yamaha and the Honda are suddenly a bit more competitive, although the Honda did look a bit of a handful again this weekend. And we've seen that at some of these flyaways. India, track they've been to before, Fabio's on the podium. Japan was a flag to flag, wasn't it? But he was more competitive throughout that weekend anyway. Obviously here he's pretty competitive. He said something about targeting the next round, but let's not forget last year he actually was quite poor there. So yeah, it seems like Fabio's made that switch though in his head as well. Obviously the Yamaha's been better, but I think he's kind of been like, right, this is what I've got. Let's try and make the most of it. And weekends like this show that as much as Morbidelli has made progress towards him this year, and a lot of the time when they've been struggling, they've been together. When the bike works, Fabio is putting on the podium. Morbidelli is 4 laps down. I know he had whatever problem, but he also was at the back anyway. He was at the back in the sprint race. So yeah, it does just show how good Fabio is, and he's going to be really annoyed next year when he sees Marquez, someone that he's battled with in the past and probably considers to be on a similar level to him, dominating on a Ducati. He sees Morbidelli doing well on a Ducati, someone that he's trounced inside his entire career, basically. Yeah, he's not going to be a happy boy, and if the Yamaha next year is not like a World Championship winning bike, he's not going to be on it in 25, that's for sure.
Yeah, he's actually considering all the contract breaks and people moving and stuff. He's probably gotten one of the more lucky ones that he's not ended up on like a second tier Aprilia for next year because everything going on, it could have easily
I
happened
actually
that he
don't think
could.
that's better than a Yamaha, though, a second tier Aprilia.
I I'd say it is though.
They're not getting. They're clearly a second tier Aprilia isn't as close to the factory Aprilia as the second tier Ducati, for example.
Oh, 100%. But the thing is with the second tier Aprilia, it's the team, not the bike, because that bike they're on is a race winning bike from last year,
Well,
whereas
yeah, that's true. But even
when was
still, though,
the
it's better to stay in factory Yamaha than go to R&F Aprilia. I'd say.
yeah, but I still think if you're on RNF Aprilia, he's gotten more than
Yeah,
two podiums, three podiums, where others have had to crash through the
probably,
year.
probably, yeah, because
Look what Miguel has done
Oliveira's
at
been
one
very
weekend.
unlucky,
Exactly.
but
Yeah.
then there's been rounds out of nowhere, and it does sound like there might be some stuff going on with that team. That seat could very well be open next week.
Yeah,
By
but
the
geez, I might
sounds of
have
it,
predicted the future. You never know.
yeah. So yeah,
Back to the Yamaha thing though. They lack drive grip. They lack the electronics understanding. They just don't have the physical grip. I actually disagree with you for probably once in the first time. I'd say we've disagreed on something. The Ducati through the corners that Martin crashed out of. When Pecco caught and passed Quartararo, they went to an onboard of him, and he literally gained through the middle of the corner. And that's when I thought, oh my god, that's trouble. Now maybe Fabio was at a point in the race. He was like, look, they've caught me. They're going to pass me. I'll manage a bit,
yeah. It
but
was pretty early in the race. I think at that point the dynamic had shifted. I think he was quicker.
maybe.
Yeah,
But
but yeah, no, I know what you mean. Yeah, I meant
no,
more
I
the other area though. The area where Vinales was pretty much matching him through the S's, and Vinales was gaining on Bagnaia in those sections.
true. Yeah, I feel
So
like before Martina crashed, I think Peck was probably taking more risk, and he was like, I gotta have to push the bike through the corner. Um, I can understand what you mean about Fabio being probably easier chance against Pecco because of the whole risk. But I still don't like he can gain as much time as where he wants, but out of that corner and every run to every braking zone, the Ducati would make a fool out of Yaman. I still don't think there's any way of overtaking. So
yeah,
I think Maverick breaks earlier, tries to carry corner speed. So if there was any way of passing him, he would have done it. So if he can't pass the guy he's braking earlier, he's not going to pass the guy who's braking late. So I understand where you're coming with from that, but I just still think that it's kind of it's so far gone that even the small little intricacies isn't really going to make a difference. But yeah, feature race was very spread in the end because nobody could overtake. If they overtake, they crashed. Marquez crashed early. Martin crashed in a straight line. Zarco was called amateur for his crash, and that's not anything against him or the bike. It was just it looked like a track day rider who got into the corner and kind of just panicked and fell off the bike. The bike fell in again a very straight line.
he
He
did
was
have his
riding around.
ride out device stuck on though. His rear ride out device was stuck on the whole race. Apparently, that was why he was so slow. So
Oh,
that could
okay,
have played
that
into
would
it a
make that.
little. But
Yeah,
yeah,
fair
his
enough. Yeah,
crash was very strange. Like he literally
that,
like got off the side of it basically.
that would explain it. So because he yeah, I hadn't heard that the right height device
Yeah.
is stuck on, so that's again news to me. But again, he regardless whether it was or wasn't, the crash was idiotic. Like he looked like someone that was like one either had brake fail and was like I have to bail, or two just kind of like got panicked on the entry of the corner and kind of
Yeah.
someone who like it looked like a novice who had missed their brake point and just didn't know what to do and they kind of just bailed. Um, so when there's already just having these crashes, like Marcus crashed out after like 5 6 laps. Again, didn't really do anything wrong. It just got to
It
kind of
is a
the point where
Honda
it was
front
getting
end though, so
yeah, exactly. It doesn't take much for that to kind of wash out. But um, like we saw Mir trying to overtake Nakagami, has a massive front end slide, pick the bike up, lose the rear. They cut to a different shot, and about 40 seconds later, the icon comes up saying it's crashed. So that's both factory handles out again. So again, Mir keeps pushing each week and keeps getting the same result that the bike won't give him anything. But it was just in the end, it was very spread. Like the last 4 or 5 laps, there was huge gaps back to Digi and P4. Massive shout out to him, best result, considering he's not going to be in the field next year. But like again, we kind of expect this is like the very spread race was what we expected. We just didn't expect the drama, I suppose. Is fair to say. Is that what you kind of agree with, Rhys, or am I getting it all wrong?
Yeah, I think so. I think because let's say um, I think just the nature of the track made it like kind of the race play out in a bit of a weird way. Because yeah, the spread race was exactly what we expected, but I think because it was so difficult to pass, I think that also played a part in the race being so interesting. Like Binder, for example, we actually haven't got him down the notes, but what a terrible race he had. He finished fifth. He had two long lap penalties, knocked off two riders, and finished fifth. And rode most of the race with one wing. Like, it's ridiculous. It was such a dramatic, chaotic race. Just you can't believe it. But yeah, they pretty much were all spread out, and I think that's kind of what played into some of the over aggression a little bit. But Martin was miles up the road, for example. He was miles away from Vinales, who had a pretty sizable gap over Bagnaia, who had a pretty sizable gap over, I think it was actually still Fabio at that point, because Aleix, it might have been Aleix initially, and then Aleix dropped back like a stone, didn't he? The soft, tough tyres. Funnily enough, if the tyre manufacturer says, "Don't, please do not use these tyres," using them doesn't end very well. Um, I don't know where Aleix did Aleix even finish in the end?
I will
I
check
yeah,
while you're talking because I don't believe he has
yeah,
any
but
points in you.
yeah, yeah, he probably dropped all the way to the back, but yeah, he might have been able to stay on. I think he actually did drop back like all the way basically to just in front of Morbidelli because obviously he was like laps down, so he didn't get overtaken by him. But yeah, it was a very spread out race, and to be honest, I think it would have been a bit boring if it hadn't been for all the drama. Obviously, we would maybe have still had that battle between Bagnaia, Vinales, and Quartararo, and that would have been like, oh, this is a cool battle for like the podium, innit? But probably wouldn't have been so dramatic. But three riders within like 7 or 8 tenths of a second of the line, that is headlines and Martin crashing, and it was such a strange crash. And again, like we said, the track conditions have played a part. Didn't really look like he did a lot wrong. I have seen people saying online it was perhaps overconfident. I think that's like sort of the pundit opinion is that perhaps he was just so overconfident. He was just chucking it into the corner. And he knew it'd stick every lap, and then he got caught out. But yeah, it's a strange one. It could happen to anybody. So hopefully he doesn't get too in his head about it because we want this championship fight to continue because obviously he took a big swing there that Bagnaia gained a lot of points back on him. That's just back up to 18 points now. So yeah, I think it literally was really the excitement that kind of made the race interesting, the drama, because the actual on-track racing wasn't particularly great, really.
Yeah, it was what we expected coming in was going to be very hard to overtake. If you do go for an overtake, you'll either need a massive pace advantage to get it done on the dirty side of the track, or you need a mistake from the rider in front. To answer your question, Lace finished 10th, 30.6 seconds back, considering he was at one
It's
point
not bad.
probably in.
It's not bad
Yeah,
tenth actually, considering how
very good.
slow he was at the end. He was about 2 seconds off, wasn't he, at the end? So
Yeah, so it was just overall like I haven't noticed here one of the worst weekends I've seen in a long time. Like from Martin's crash to like there was just so many things went wrong. It was just messy. Again, all these like again I go back to my conspiracy about the fan noise. There was again it's just unfortunately right. I love the fact that we have a race in Indonesia. It's just done wrong on so many levels.
yeah,
So they've resurfaced the track because of all like first time they built a track, they used the wrong materials that basically caused it to rip, or I say rip, lift is was more the issue to having. They've resurfaced it. Riders again complained there was no grip. That's just because it doesn't get used. So again, we have more issues there. It was so dirty that even when it cleaned up on the racing line, no racing could really go on there. You could have very little overtaking without having a massive incident. We saw Leish take out Binder take out Marini, Binder attempt to move on Oliveira and send him into the gravel. There's probably more throughout the other classes that happened that were other riders getting picked up. Um, it was just messy the whole race weekend long, and again, it was very spread in the main race because tire pressures, tire temperatures, everything kind of gets into the one. We couldn't use certain tires, which means strategy goes out the window. So riders who can only kind of make certain tires work for them are limited. Um, like we talked about Binder finishing fifth, two long lap penalties, and everything that went on in his race. It just shows Digi finishing P4. a Yamaha on the podium. Do I need to say any more of how kind of a weird and not a good weekend? And again, unfortunately, I looked at the India GP. That was done right. Good track, went down well. Now again, we always have a question marks whether financially it's right for the locals because that's what we heard from Formula One and their time there. But I think everything at Lombok at the moment is done right or is done
Doesn't
wrong, I
get
should say.
used as well. So it's a similar situation in terms of not a lot of track usage, but there wasn't the same problems there.
Nowhere near the same problems exactly. And like, am I right in saying that Bud wasn't used for like 4 years before he went there?
Yeah, pretty sure. Yeah,
And
something like that.
like, it was nowhere near as bad as this. So Um, again, it just shows that this part of the world, the Asian Grand Prix can happen and they can be a success. And it's great for that part of the world because a lot of manufacturers come down that region. A lot of big fans, like we've already talked about, the market support in Indonesia. Indonesia's huge for MotoGP. Unfortunately, it feels like we've tried to make an event down there, but kind of half-arsed it. And so have the whoever owned and built the track and stuff, and decided to put it out on that island. Um, Whatever they tried to make it like a whole quirky thing. It was like, oh, come for 2 weeks and have like a GP on one weekend and have a whole holiday out as well. It's massively backfired. And I think, like, put it this way, right? If we go there, I don't know when the contract's up. I could see us living out this contract and that being that, not going back there, which would be a great shame for the locals. But then again, is it even a shame for the locals if they can't get to the race? So it's a shambles really, the whole system they have in Indonesia, unfortunately, and it's the locals that are paying for it because they're the ones, the diehard fans that would love to see Mark Marquez up close and racing after a track, and Pecco, Martin, Fabio, to see their heroes. Same with India, like you saw so many happy fans at India with Marquez, Fabio, all the support, all the merchandise, getting to see their heroes for the first time and not being able to travel to Europe to see a race. And again, like you need to understand these aren't the rich countries in the world. Like this isn't some of the more like some of these worlds are third, like some of these countries are third world in some parts, like, and a lot of it's quite hard for these to get around the world to come watch the racing. So the fact we're going to the country is brilliant, but it's just not being done right. Everything this weekend was a mess, and it was just I was watching this race, and after the Jorge Martin crash, I was like, this is just ridiculous. Like we shouldn't like. For me, the Jorge Martin crash, he doesn't get his knee down, and if you're not getting your knee down, the front is gone. You've either made a huge mistake or something is out of your control. And like I saw the onboard, he doesn't do anything wrong.
He
He
was on the
crashes
perfect like racing line, wasn't he? Pretty much.
exactly. He was on the racing line, which is the grippy part of the track, and like it goes so early. And you see him, he gets up and he turn around, he's just looking at the bike, going like he just was like confused. Like, and I know a lot of riders like when like you see Pecco crash and he kind of looks a bit confused and bemused, but then after a while he's walking away. He's like, oh, I can't believe I've done that. But Martin was there for a minute, like going, how is that after happening? And then he's at the side of the track watching, and then his teammate crashes right in front of him in almost another similar situation where he's braking, leaning in, gets nowhere near his knee down, the bike goes. It was such a messy weekend that I just overall, I don't know what you have to kind of say in it, but it was just messy. But moving on, I suppose we'll cover the race winner, Pecco Bagnaia, back into Championship League, wins it. I wouldn't say comfortably. He got to the lead, pulled a bit of a gap over Maverick, and I'm surprised to be honest. Even I think, to be honest, he was doing his own race, and I think Maverick came back to him more than he caught Maverick because a lot of the commentary said P2 OK would have been the pit board you'd be trying out to him after the week he's had and after the just the kind of lack of speed he's had lately and stuff, and just how kind of poor his weekend has been. That fact at P2 would have been perfect. It would have put him back into the lead, taking the pressure off. The fact Maverick kind of came back to him, his pace was decent. He passed him, made a gap, and then towards the end they all kind of came together and he just managed to get through it. He just gets it. Takes back league 18 points with the sprint format. It's still not enough to be comfortable. But again, today he just did enough. I felt like this weekend, in terms of racing, he just did the maximum he could have got out of it. And today, because of what happened to other people, the win was on the table for him, whereas only P6, P7 yesterday in the sprint was his best result. Again, I think it's a good salvage, and I think you mentioned earlier in the podcast, if Martin wins the double or does the double and wins today, that's probably Pecco beaten. I think now it's slightly back in Pecco's favour. I still think even with the points advantage, Pecco isn't riding well enough at the moment and isn't kind of thereabouts at the moment. Like the India crash was huge. Unnecessary mistake again from him that threw away a lot of points. And for me, that just shows that anything can happen in these final 4 or 5 rounds, 10 races to go. So, what do you think of Pecco today? Were you surprised he managed to win it? Did you think he'd kind of tighten up after Pecco, after Martin crashed, that he'd just take the points, or did you expect him to push on and try and make hay where the sun shines?
To be fair, I can't really fault him. I can't fault his ride today, and the way he carved through the field from 13th to be basically up as like the top 3 or 4 in the first like 3 laps was very, very good. And under that amount of pressure as well is kind of like one of those things. I don't know if you saw Checkered Flag, which is something that TNT Sports do after, and with them having like Neil Hodgson on their team, I think they do have good access to Ducati, and they're always more than happy to come and talk to TNT Sports. So they were talking to Chipati and Tardozzi after the race, and apparently sort of like some of Pecco's telemetry guys were sort of giving him a pep talk, kind of like even on the more human side, not even necessarily on the telemetry, but kind of just saying, you need to just take a step back and stop sort of not stop worrying so much, but whatever they said to him seemed to help him out. He had a different mental attitude today, and yeah, he kind of seemed a bit more like the old Pecco, a bit more sort of carving his way through. Not really, didn't look so flustered in the race. Looked probably a bit more on form. And I think he went into the race, I think, just thinking, if I could try and get a podium, Martin obviously is gone, not going to beat him, just trying to limit the amount of points. But then he's actually come out of the race with the race win, gaining 25 back on him. I think that could just be the switch for him, because we've seen this before. It's like he is so kind of mentally fragile in a way. He can kind of change so quickly. And I think, to be quite honest, it's just now that he's sort of finally got a bit of momentum behind him, he's just pulled a load of points into Martin. The championship leader's finally gone back up going through a round. I don't think Martin's going to be too bothered about his crash because it was so weird, but I think Bagnaio's going to think, right, I've got 18 points now. That's actually getting on for a race win's worth. I beat him today. He can think that he put him under pressure or whatever, or he was felt under the pressure. He had a great ride from his position. I think it will build a bit more for Bagnaia now, so I think he might genuinely start to be on a bit more. But yeah, in terms of his riding, I think he was just riding quick throughout the whole race, very aggressive at the beginning when he needed to be. Probably knew that not Bagnaia, sorry, he is Bagnaia. Probably knew that Vinales would probably come back towards him a little bit. Obviously, after the last race and all the other times he's raced Vinales lately, seems that Vinales kind of slips back towards him a bit. And obviously, he just sort of blasted him on the straight, got the run through and just blasted him. So yeah, I think he was pretty much in control after that. I think he'd kind of already just gone into that mode of, right, I got up to the podium, I'll just finish there. And once Martin crashed, just promoted him up and gave him the chance to win and gain the points back. And yeah, I think finally, just for him, probably the pressure was kind of off after he'd had that pep talk and all that stuff. And just the way he seems to work, I think he probably will bounce back from it. But it could be one of those things that if Martin then beats him, does the double at the next round, then it could start to spiral down again. But I think for now, we may have Pecco maybe not back to his best, because I think that took a long time to build that form up in the first place. But I think he might look a bit better and not be... I don't think we'll be seeing him go through Q1 next week, for example.
Yeah, it's overall, it's with Pecco, it's always a bit of a mystery of which Pecco you're going to get. On his day, untouchable. When he's slightly off, though, it can lead to a crash out of the podium positions when he's in for a comfortable points advantage over his nearest rival. So he's countlessly thrown away points for the last 2, 3, I suppose his whole time he's been in GP, really. Um, Biggest flaw, really, is that he makes these mistakes when not always under pressure. He can be comfortable and throw away big points. We've seen it. Um, this we shouldn't be sitting here and comparing him and Jorge Martin. He should be head and shoulders. He should have finished P3 today behind Maverick and Jorge Martin, and that should have probably been like, and that's it. Pecco now only needs 10 points from Phillip Island, he's champion. That's the way the season has been. He's been that quick. He's just made so many mistakes. Crashed out of Le Mans, Texas, Argentina, India. That's enough to give you enough points that you would be comfortable at this point of the season, where you go to a monsoon race, you go to a race that's completely dirty track like we had this weekend, and you're comfortable going, right, I can take P5 today. They can't afford that. I can follow Jorge Martin home for the rest of the season. I can do that. I can do what I need to do. But just so I think he's just been so quick. I think he's trying to win races that he doesn't have to win sometimes, and that's why the likes of Argentina, he didn't need to win that race. It was a wet race. Anything can happen in the rain. It's a track that doesn't get used. It's never going to be a high grip track, and it unfortunately for him was one of a mistake that was unnecessary. And then again, we had India, and just there's been so many mistakes. But again, on of today's performance, he was clear, solid, concise, and did enough to get the win. Now, he still looks slightly shaky to me. The fact that they caught him on the last lap and they really came back to him, and that he maybe timed it perfectly just to kind of maybe coast the last sector just to make sure no mistakes get to the line. But it was a bit close across the line for me.
Yeah, probably was a bit too close, but it is so tricky that last couple of corners. He probably just thought, right, just make sure you bring it home, kind of thing.
Now, to finish off the podcast, there has been talks of a riders' union. Now, a lot of people think it's crazy that they need one. Essentially, it's Gintoli, I believe, who's leading it. Um, what's your opinion on this? Do you believe they need one? Is it modern riders being kind of fairies? There's a lot of opinions on it? I'd like to hear what you had because we kind of just put it in the last second into the notes. We actually haven't talked at all about it, so it'd be interesting to hear what you say.
I think it's probably a good thing. Well, I say probably. I think it is a good thing for the riders because, of course, what this allows them is just to have a bit more of a united front. And I think in the past they've disagreed over issues and different things, and riders' egos, and they have like obviously their own agenda that they're trying to push. But if there's a united front where like Sylvain Guintoli can turn up and say the riders say this and that, and I imagine there'll probably be a representative like an actual rider on the grid as well, or a couple of riders on the grid that will go alongside that. But yeah, I think it's good because they can kind of it's a bit more protection for them because I think some of the things that have kind of spurred on these unions are some of the contract wranglings that have gone on, and I don't mean sort of normal buyouts and things like that, like we've seen with Marquez buying out of his contract. And it's more of a Moto 2 problem, Moto 3 problem than perhaps perhaps a MotoGP problem. For example, like Fanati being dropped after 6 races by Speed Up, despite having a contract. Sean Dillon Kelly being dropped by American Racing despite having a contract and things like that. Obviously, I know there are performance clauses in some of these contracts, but just the fact that these riders are being kind of sacked mid-season and it's not really right. And then also just for the safety aspect of it as well, the riders can sit there and say, we want the Portimao gravel changing because it's too dangerous. We won't race if you don't change the gravel kind of thing. And if there's a united front of them saying that, it puts more pressures on the organisers and things like that to actually push these changes through. So to make sure that the contracts are fair and riders aren't being wrongfully treated. For example, something that sort of came out last year with Tom Booth Amos, for example, sort of being assaulted in the pit box by his team and things like that. Maybe something like that. He could go to the union and say, look, like this has happened, or the union would be able to kind of stop that from happening because they're like, look, if you spot this kind of thing, the riders can kind of be a bit more of a force, and it puts more pressure on these teams and these people, and like I said, obviously the organisers and race direction as well, because obviously the riders got problems with the penalties as well. And to be honest, I think they probably just need a whole new set of people in race direction, and maybe that's if that's the only thing that comes from it, it's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. If they can force that through, that's worth it. But yeah, overall, it gives good benefits to sort of all the riders, and I think most industries have unions, so why not? At the end of the day, as much as we see it as a sport that we love and things like that, is their job at the end of the day. So they're entitled, I suppose, to it in the same way that teachers, doctors, anybody is.
Yeah, you're on the money there. I agree as well. That's that. Overall, it's an extra safety net, and like again, as you were talking there about contracts, I was thinking it'll come in helpful for the Portimao gravel. That's the famous Portimao gravel. So
Yeah.
there will be like in India they did the track walk and they're like, well, the couple of bars that are a bit close that we don't like, and there's a few things. And again, a lot of time they're like, yeah, that's great, but nothing happens. So maybe now with this new union, maybe things get sped up and maybe things happen, and it probably won't change anything. You won't see anything different. It'll just make the sport probably a bit tighter off track, and we'll probably hear less rumbles from riders being unhappy about some of the decisions made by the directors and all that. So overall, I think it's a good step. It's a shame that we need it in the first place, that they don't actually kind of listen to the riders on their own. But if it's gone to this far that we need it, we clearly do need it. And again, it will be definitely a benefit. And I think it'll probably allow the riders to relax a bit more. And I think we might have, it might open the championship up to new opportunities in down the line, different tracks, different stuff. Because at the moment, it's kind of like the executives are like, we race there, you just go do it. And it's kind of like, it's just an order more than like, we are part of this championship, we should have a say how it's run, we should have a say in everything really. And I think now with this new riders union, it'll become a bit more transparent, and everyone will probably benefit from this really. So yeah, right, we are going to leave it there. We're probably over the hour and a half mark once again. Summary: messy weekend here in Indonesia. We hope that somehow they can turn around, because it would be a shame for Indonesia to lose their Grand Prix. I think we both can agree that Indonesia deserves wholeheartedly to have the Premier Class go there year in, year out, since there's so many avid fans in the country. But at the moment, everything going on there with the race, the track, everything going, just the whole area really, and it's running, it's probably not ideal at the moment. And when we're having crashes from top riders crashing out of the race, from basically not making any mistake, it's kind of tipping point for me where something needs to happen. So we're going to leave it there. We'll be back for Phillip Island, a race that we'll have so much to talk about. A sprint race at Phillip Island is a pretty mouth-watering, just thinking about it already. So it's going to be a ding-dong battle in Australia, and we'll see you then. Thanks for listening in. See you next time.